The war had raged for centuries. Entire civilizations had crumbled beneath the endless conflict between the Zalari Dominion and the Varic Empire. Theirs was not a war of conquest, nor of ideology. It was a struggle so ancient that its original cause had been lost to time. What remained were generations of warriors locked in an unbreakable cycle of retaliation, each battle fueling the next. Across the galaxy, lesser species had long since learned to either submit or flee, their voices drowned beneath the thunder of interstellar warfare. The Galactic Union, a coalition of neutral species, had spent decades attempting to negotiate peace. Every effort had failed. Ceasefires dissolved within weeks. Treaties were nothing more than hollow words, and every compromise was eventually shattered by the weight of vengeance. Now, after centuries of attrition, the Union faced an undeniable truth. Neither side would ever win. The war had become a disease, self-perpetuating, insatiable, and terminal. The Grand Chamber of the Union was filled with the weary representatives of a dozen species, each bearing the scars of a war they had never wished to fight. Chancellor Orlon, a wizened Yelthin with deep-set eyes and a voice like cracking stone, surveyed the gathered diplomats. His kind had once numbered in the trillions. Now, they were a shadow of their former strength. "We are out of time," Orlon declared, his voice cutting to the low murmurs of despair. "Our resources are exhausted. Our fleets are scattered. If this war continues, it will consume every civilization in its path. There is but one power left that has not chosen a side." The chamber fell silent. The name was unspoken, but everyone knew it. The humans. Humanity had been a mystery since the moment they were discovered, a late arrival to the galactic stage, observing the universe with quiet curiosity, but never stepping into the fray. Unlike other species, they had not pledged allegiance to any faction, nor had they expanded aggressively beyond their home system. The few ambassadors who had spoken with humans described them as enigmatic, calculating, and strangely indifferent to conflicts that consumed the stars. A Zalari delegate, his skeletal frame encased in ceremonial battle armor, scoffed. "You would place your hopes in an untested race? The humans are nothing. They have no empire, no war record, no place in this fight." And yet, a Varic warlord growled, his scaled fingers flexing. "They have never been conquered. They exist on the edge of our war, untouched." Orlon met their gazes. "Perhaps that is why they are the only ones who can end it." The decision was made. A delegation was assembled. Envoys from a union, veterans of the war, and desperate leaders willing to beg if necessary. They traveled to Earth aboard a diplomatic vessel, unsure if humanity would even grant them an audience. The first surprise came when they entered the Sol system. There were no warships, no grand displays of military power. Earth's defenses were minimal, at least on the surface. It was an odd contrast to the paranoia that most species developed after first contact with hostile civilizations. Yet the humans did not seem afraid. When the delegation landed in the city of Geneva, they were greeted with an almost casual politeness. Human officials led them into a towering glass structure where they were met by a single individual, Director Elias Voss. He was unassuming, dressed in simple attire with sharp, attentive eyes. There were no guards flanking him, no elaborate formalities. He gestured for them to sit, as though they were discussing a minor trade dispute rather than the fate of the galaxy. Orlon leaned forward. "Director Voss, the war has reached its breaking point. If something does not change, everything we have built will be lost. We have come to ask your aid." Voss listened without interruption as each envoy made their plea. They spoke of the atrocities committed by both sides, of planets reduced to ash, of the hopelessness that now gripped the galaxy. When they finally finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke. "We have observed this war since its inception. We have calculated every engagement, every loss, every failure. You assume that it is endless because neither side has the power to win." He leaned back, folding his hands. "That assumption is incorrect." The Varic warlord narrowed his eyes. "Then why have you done nothing? You watched as entire species were wiped out. If you had the ability to stop this, why remain neutral?" Voss regarded him with a faint, unreadable smile. "Because we were never neutral." The word sent a ripple of unease through the delegation. Orlon found his voice. Then what are you? Pragmatic, Voss said simply. Wars end in one of two ways, exhaustion or intervention. We calculated that neither the Zalari nor the Varric would ever reach exhaustion. That left only intervention. And intervention requires precise timing. The Varric warlord snarled. You speak as though victory is a certainty. Voss met his gaze. It is. A chill settled over the room. The delegates had expected reluctance, arrogance, even desperation. They had not expected this. Calm certainty, as though the outcome had been predetermined long before this meeting. Orlon hesitated. Then you will help? Voss exhaled slowly, as if he had been waiting for this question for a very long time. We will. Orlon's relief was immediate, but it faded when he saw the expression on Voss's face. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction, just inevitability. How long? The Zalari delegate asked. How long will it take for you to turn the tide? Voss's answer came without hesitation. 3 hours. Silence. The Zalari delegate let out a rasping chuckle. Impossible. Voss stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Return to your people. Tell them to prepare. The war ends tomorrow. As the delegation left Earth, a deep, unsettling realization settled over them. Humanity had not agreed to fight for one side or the other. They had agreed to end the war. And the way Voss had spoken, without hesitation, without doubt, made them wonder if, all along, humanity had simply been waiting for permission. The war fleets of the Zalari Dominion and the Varric Empire had fought for centuries, but nothing had prepared them for what arrived that day. Humanity did not announce its approach with grand speeches or a display of overwhelming force. There was no drawn-out battle plan, no request for time to mobilize. Instead, the moment the Galactic Union delegation had left Earth's orbit, the human response had already begun. The first sign of their arrival was not detected by scanners or intercepted transmissions. It was silence, a deep, absolute silence that stretched across every communications network used in the war. Zalari command centers, accustomed to the constant stream of battle reports, found their channels eerily dead. Varric warlords, mid-transmission with their forces, suddenly heard nothing but static. Across the front lines, thousands of ships continued their engagements, their weapons firing, their pilots shouting orders. Yet the universe refused to acknowledge them. Then came the shadows. They emerged from the void between stars, their forms sleek and black against the burning wreckage of battle-torn space. The ships bore no insignias, no recognizable identifiers. They did not appear on enemy radar. They did not disrupt space with energy signatures. They were simply there, as if the darkness had solidified into steel and will. The Zalari flagship Dominion's Wrath was the first of all. Admiral Ketrick had led countless battles and survived sieges that had broken lesser beings. But for the first time in his long and bloodstained career, he did not see the attack coming. One moment, his fleet stood unchallenged over the contested world of Dorthan Prime. The next, his flagship was severed in half by a weapon that did not exist a second before it was fired. Ketrick never had time to react. One instant, he was issuing orders, his voice sharp with the confidence of a warrior who had never known true defeat. The next, he was staring at the ruptured remains of his command deck, watching in mute horror as the cold vacuum reached for him. His last thought was not of war, not of the Dominion's endless pursuit of supremacy. It was of something far more alien to him: regret. The Varric fared no better. Their dreadnought Bloodfang, an icon of terror that had reduced entire planets to ash, was struck by a force so precise it seemed surgical. Its engines, once roared with the power of 100 captured stars, dimmed in an instant. The ship's weapon systems deactivated, as if they had never existed. Thousands of Varric warriors, bred for battle, found themselves floating helplessly in their armor, staring at their useless claws and fangs. For the first time in their existence, they were not predators. They were prey. Across the war-torn expanse, the same scenario played out again and again. Human ships did not engage in traditional combat. They did not exchange fire or maneuver for positioning. They simply removed threats. With brutal efficiency, they eliminated command structures, neutralized weapons, and left entire armadas drifting without power. The technology was beyond comprehension. Zalari and Varric scientists had spent centuries perfecting warfare, designing countermeasures against every known weapon and defense. But the humans had never fought before. Their weapons were not known, and the unknown could not be countered. On the bridge of the human command ship, Indomitable, Director Elias Voss observed the unfolding battle, or rather, the dismantling of it. His expression was unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched once mighty fleets crumble without resistance. Around him, the operators of his vessel worked in perfect synchrony, executing pre-planned maneuvers with mechanical precision. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. A Zalari general, his reptilian features twisted in disbelief, appeared on the screen. His voice was raw with fury and desperation. "What are you?" he demanded. "This is not war. This is—" Voss tilted his head slightly. "Correction. This was war. It is now over." The general bared his teeth. "We will not surrender." Voss sighed, almost as if he found the conversation tedious. "You misunderstand. Surrender implies that you have a choice." He gestured slightly, and in that moment, the Zalari general's flagship, once a vessel that had survived 300 years of warfare, vanished from existence. Not exploded, not destroyed, simply gone. The Varric, watching from their own command centers, had seen enough. Their warlords, beings who had laughed in the face of death for generations, hesitated. They knew slaughter. They understood pain and sacrifice. But this was not a war. It was a correction, a reset. The galaxy had been playing a game for centuries, a game of attrition, of alliances, of shifting tides. Humanity had not come to play. They had come to end the game. The human fleets moved as one, their ships slipping to the battlefield with an ease that defied physics. Every action was deliberate, every strike a calculated step toward a singular goal, the elimination of war itself. Voss turned his gaze to the tactical display. The Zalari and Varric forces had been reduced to a fraction of their former power in mere hours. No, not reduced, rendered irrelevant. A quiet beep signaled the final transmission of the night. It was from the Galactic Union. Chancellor Orlan's face appeared on the screen, his expression unreadable. "It is done, then," Orlan said. It was not a question. Voss nodded. "In 3 hours, this war will be nothing but history." Orlan hesitated. "And the Zalari? The Varric?" Voss's expression did not change. "They will make their decision soon enough." As the transmission ended, Voss turned his attention back to the battlefield. He did not smile. There was no victory to celebrate, no triumph to savor. This was simply what had to be done, and it was not over yet. The war was ending, but the Zalari and Varric refused to accept it. They had spent centuries shaping the galaxy through fire and blood, carving their dominance into bones of lesser species. They did not know how to stop. Even as their fleets were systematically dismantled, their commanders barked desperate orders, trying to rally what remained. It was the only way they knew how to exist. Yet the battlefield no longer belonged to them. Across 100 war fronts, Zalari and Varric warships drifted, silent and powerless. Communications were severed. Weapon systems had been deactivated. No explosions marked the destruction of fleets. Instead, the void was filled with the eerie stillness of forced obsolescence. Admiral Vreenak of the Varric stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, Iron Maw, fists clenched so tightly his claws bit into his palms. He had commanded war campaigns before his ancestors had even finished evolving into sentience. His name was legend, spoken in reverence and fear. Now, for the first time, he felt something he had never known: helplessness. The humans had torn through his forces with impossible precision. His dreadnought's weapons had gone silent before a single shot could be fired. His engines had shut down, as if the ship itself had lost the will to fight. Every attempt to counterattack had been answered with the same quiet, methodical efficiency. And the worst part? The humans were not gloating. There was no arrogance, no satisfaction in the destruction of 2 great empires. There was only cold inevitability. A sharp chime echoed through the silent bridge. A transmission. Vreenak turned. expecting the face of another defeated warlord, another desperate attempt to coordinate a resistance. Instead, it was them. Elias Voss appeared on the holoscreen, seated in what looked like a modest command chair. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable. No medals adorned his uniform, no symbols of power or authority. He spoke as if the outcome had already been decided. "Admiral Vreenak," Voss said, his voice calm, "your forces are defeated." Vreenak bared his fangs. "We do not surrender." Voss inclined his head slightly. "Yes, we anticipated you would say that." Something shifted in the air, something unseen but deeply felt. The Iron Maw's lights flickered. Vreenak, second in command, turned toward him, her scales bristling with unease. "Sir, we've lost internal control." Vreenak's mind raced. How? The humans had not boarded his ship. No external weapon had breached the hull. Yet across the bridge, his crew's control panels dimmed one by one. Voss continued speaking, as if he had all the time in the universe. "You assume war is about endurance, that if you fight long enough, someone will tire first. But you never stop to consider the possibility that your enemy might not be playing the same game." The Vera commander roared, slamming his fists against the console. "This is not war. This is—" Voss finished the sentence for him. "Correction. This was war. But wars are unpredictable, inefficient, wasteful. We prefer solutions." Across the Varric and Zalari fleets, the final phase of humanity's intervention unfolded. Ships did not explode in fire and debris. They simply shut down. Engines failed. Power cores flickered out. Life support remained, but nothing else. The war machines that had once shaped the course of galactic history were reduced to inert, drifting relics. Admiral Vreenak stared at the screens in stunned silence. A fleet of ghosts. Voss's voice came one last time, quiet and absolute. "You have two choices. You can accept this outcome, or we can remove you from the equation entirely. We leave the decision to you." The transmission cut off. Vreenak's hands trembled as he looked around the bridge. His warriors, his unbreakable, unyielding warriors, stood motionless. There was no fight left in them, only silence. The Zalari, too, were facing the same moment of reckoning. Their High Marshal, a being who had once commanded the deaths of entire planetary populations with a flick of his wrist, now sat frozen before his darkened control panel. He understood what had happened. They had lost. Completely. Not in a final, desperate battle. Not in a last stand that would be sung of for generations. They had simply been rendered irrelevant. The realization was more horrifying than any weapon. And so, the war that had lasted for centuries ended without a final battle, without a great sacrifice, without a glorious victory. It ended because the humans had decided it would. The war was over, but the galaxy did not yet understand what that truly meant. Across 1,000 star systems, the once great fleets of the Zalari Dominion and the Varric Empire hung in silent defeat. There was no fanfare, no declarations of victory. Only the slow, creeping realization that the conflict which had defined the cosmos for generations had vanished in mere hours, and humanity had not claimed the spoils. On the diplomatic station orbiting the neutral world of Helios Prime, the Galactic Union convened once more. The chamber, once filled with desperate arguments and exhausted negotiations, now thrummed with uneasy silence. The Zalari and Varric delegations sat rigid, their expressions unreadable. The war had been taken from them. What remained was an emptiness they did not know how to fill. Chancellor Orlan, his ancient eyes heavy with the weight of history, turned his gaze toward the human representative. Elias Voss sat with the same quiet patience he had displayed since the beginning. He did not gloat. He did not revel in his species' dominance. He simply waited. Orlan cleared his throat, his voice measured. "It is done." Voss inclined his head. Yes, the Zalari delegate, a skeletal figure whose entire life had been devoted to war, struggled for words. "And now," Voss studied him for a moment before responding, "now you adapt." The Varric warlord's claws tapped against the table, an unconscious display of agitation. "You dismantled our fleets. You erased our war machines. You left us powerless." Voss shook his head. "No, We left you alive. The words hung in the air, weightier than any threat. The Zalari and Varric had expected conquest, occupation, perhaps even extermination. But humanity had taken nothing. They had no interest in ruling, no interest in reshaping the galaxy in their image. They had simply removed war as an option. Orlon leaned forward, his voice cautious. You must understand, this has never happened before. An empire does not simply fall without a victor to claim its place. Voss's expression remained unreadable. Then perhaps it is time for something new. A murmur spread through the chamber. The Zalari and Varric exchanged uncertain glances. Without war, what were they? What purpose remained when the conflict that had shaped their civilizations was no longer theirs to fight? The Varric warlord let out a slow breath, his claws still. And if we refuse to adapt? Voss met his gaze without hesitation. Then you will not survive. The words were not spoken as a threat. They were simply a fact. Orlon exhaled, his ancient hands pressing together. And what of humanity? Voss finally leaned back, his fingers tapping absently against the table. We will leave. A ripple of shock passed through the room. The Zalari delegate's mouth opened, then closed. You would walk away? Voss nodded. We never wanted to rule. We never wanted war. And now neither do you. He let the silence settle before continuing, his voice calm. We have given you a gift, a galaxy without war. What you choose to do with it is up to you. The weight of his words sank deep. The Zalari and Varric, stripped of their endless cycle of violence, were left with a question they had never dared ask. What comes next? For the first time in centuries, the answer did not involve war. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply changed it.